She built a champion. Then he destroyed the only person who never betrayed him. The crowd erupted before the bell had even finished ringing. CHAMPION. Flashbulbs exploded from every direction. Reporters shoved microphones over one another. Cameras hunted for the newest king of American boxing. In the center of the ring stood 26-year-old Ethan Cole, the undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. His gloves were still dripping with sweat. His face showed almost no emotion. Millions believed they were looking at a man who had reached the top alone. They were wrong. Watching from the shadows hidden behind hundreds of celebrating fans, stood the woman who had sacrificed 5 years of her life to make that moment possible. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply whispered to herself, "Congratulations. You finally don't need me anymore." Then she quietly turned around and walked away. She had no idea that within a few months, the very man she had saved would become the reason she lost everything. 5 years earlier, the old Riverside Boxing Club looked more like a warehouse than a gym. The roof leaked whenever it rained. Half the punching bags had been stitched together 3 or 4 times. The heating barely worked during winter. The mirrors were cracked. The paint peeled from the walls. No investor wanted the place. No sponsor wanted its fighters. No one believed the club had a future, except its owner, Victoria Hayes. At 32, Victoria had already lived through enough disappointment to last several lifetimes. Her father had built Riverside from nothing before dying of a heart attack. Everyone expected her to sell the property. Instead, she took over. Every morning she cleaned the floors herself. She repaired equipment, balanced the accounts, negotiated with suppliers, worked the front desk, coached beginners, handled injuries, ordered food. Sometimes she slept in her office because she couldn't afford another employee. People laughed at her. A woman running a boxing gym? It'll be closed within a year. But she never answered. She simply kept working. Because Riverside wasn't just a business. It was the last piece of her father still alive. One freezing November evening, a skinny 19-year-old walked into the gym carrying nothing but a ripped backpack. His shoes were falling apart. His jacket had holes in both sleeves. His nose had clearly been broken before. His knuckles were scarred. He looked exhausted, hungry, dangerous. Victoria looked up from the reception desk. "You here to train?" He nodded. "I can't pay." She studied him for several seconds. "What made you come here?" His answer surprised her. "I heard this is the only gym where people don't get thrown out for being poor." Silence filled the room. Then Victoria smiled. "Who told you that?" "My mother." Victoria froze. "What?" "She trained here years ago." Victoria searched his face again. Then it hit her. The eyes. Exactly the same. "Rachel." The young man nodded. "I'm Ethan." Victoria remembered Rachel immediately. One of the toughest women she'd ever coached. She'd quit boxing after getting pregnant. Then disappeared. Victoria swallowed hard. "How is your mother?" Ethan looked at the floor. "She died 6 months ago." Everything became quiet. Even the sounds of sparring in the background seemed distant. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "It doesn't change anything." "No, it doesn't." Victoria handed him an old pair of gloves. "They're used." "I don't care. They smell terrible. I've smelled worse." She laughed for the first time that day. "Show me what you've got." The entire gym stopped watching their own training within 30 seconds. The kid wasn't polished. Not even close. His footwork was rough. His defense almost non-existent. His combinations were wild. But every punch carried unbelievable natural power. He moved like someone who had learned to fight long before entering a boxing ring. Not for trophies. For survival. Victoria watched carefully. She wasn't seeing technique. She was seeing instinct. Something coaches spend decades searching for. After 3 rounds she stopped him. "Who trained you?" "No one." "Impossible." "I fought wherever people wanted to fight. In school. In parking lots." "Why?" "They paid." The room fell silent again. Victoria understood immediately. He hadn't been chasing violence. He'd been buying groceries. That night she couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his movements, the mistakes, the raw talent, the impossible timing. By sunrise she had already made her decision. She offered him a full scholarship. No fees, free equipment, nutrition, competition expenses, everything. Ethan stared at her. Why? Because someone once did the same for me. I can't repay you. I'm not asking you to. The next 5 years became war. Not against opponents. Against life itself. Every morning started before sunrise. Roadwork, strength training, technical drills, film study, nutrition, recovery, more sparring, more conditioning, more discipline. Victoria demanded perfection. Sometimes Ethan hated her. Sometimes he stormed out. Sometimes he screamed. But every single time, she was right. When sponsors refused to support him, Victoria mortgaged part of the gym. When he broke his hand, she stayed at the hospital every night. When he lost his first professional fight by controversial decision, she sat beside him until sunrise without saying a word. She simply stayed. Sometimes, presence says more than advice. Slowly, victories started coming. Local titles, regional championships, national rankings, television appearances, money, recognition, fans. The world finally noticed Ethan. But only those inside Riverside knew what every victory truly cost. Victoria skipped meals so Ethan could have professional nutrition. She postponed repairing the gym roof because competition travel came first. She sold her father's classic motorcycle to pay for an elite training camp. She never told Ethan. He never asked. 3 months before the World Championship fight, an unexpected visitor entered Riverside Boxing Club. The moment Victoria saw him, every muscle in her body tensed. Richard Wolfe, one of the most famous boxing trainers in America. Elegant suit, expensive watch, perfect smile. To everyone else, a legend. To Victoria, a nightmare wearing polished shoes. He walked through the gym as though he owned it. His eyes landed on Ethan. So, he smiled. That's the boy everyone's talking about. Victoria stepped between them. What are you doing here? Richard looked amused. I heard one of my old students finally produced something valuable. I'm not your student anymore. You'll always be one. Ethan frowned. You know each other? Victoria answered before Richard could. Unfortunately. Richard laughed softly. You still hold grudges. I remember facts. Years earlier, Victoria had trained under Richard. At first, she believed he was a genius, until she learned how he really operated. Whenever wealthy gamblers wanted a specific outcome, certain fighters suddenly entered matches with untreated injuries. Others were forced into impossible weight cuts. Some received illegal injections. Some were pushed back into the ring before healing. Broken hands, damaged eyesight, permanent brain trauma, young careers destroyed. Richard always claimed they knew the risks. Victoria knew better. He had treated fighters like disposable investments, not human beings. She walked away. He never forgave her. Now, he stood inside her gym again, looking directly at Ethan. I've trained world champions. Victoria's voice turned cold. And buried careers. Richard ignored her. Ethan, the young champion, stepped forward. If you really want to become the greatest. Richard smiled. You'll eventually need someone bigger than this little gym. Victoria felt something inside her stomach tighten. Not fear. Recognition. She knew that smile. She had seen countless young fighters lose everything after believing it. Ethan looked between them. Confused. Curious. Tempted. And for the first time in 5 years, Victoria realized the hardest fight of her life wasn't going to happen inside a boxing ring. It was going to be for the trust of the man she had raised into a champion. And she had no idea that she was already beginning to lose. The champion chose the wrong mentor and began destroying the only person who had ever protected him. The morning after Richard Wolfe appeared at Riverside Boxing Club, something had changed. Not in the gym. In Ethan. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't listening. Victoria noticed it immediately. Every correction she gave was followed by silence instead of action. Every piece of advice was met with a distant nod. His eyes kept drifting toward his phone, as if he were waiting for a message from someone else. She tried to ignore the feeling growing in her chest. But experience had taught her one painful lesson. A boxer usually loses a fight long before stepping into the ring. It begins the moment doubt enters his mind. 3 days later, Richard made his move. Not publicly, privately. After one of Ethan's promotional interviews, a black luxury sedan pulled alongside him. The rear window rolled down. Richard smiled. Need a ride? Ethan hesitated. It'll only take 10 minutes. Against his better judgment, he got in. The car wasn't headed to a gym. It stopped outside one of the most exclusive athletic performance centers in the country. Olympic-size recovery pools, private laboratories, altitude chambers, state-of-the-art equipment. Every room looked like something from the future. Richard watched Ethan's reaction. It's impressive, isn't it? Ethan couldn't hide his amazement. Our fighters don't wait in line for equipment. He pointed toward a wall covered in championship belts. They become legends. For the next 2 hours, Richard introduced Ethan to nutritionists, sports scientists, physiotherapists, psychologists, and famous retired champions. Everywhere Ethan looked, people treated Richard like royalty. The message was clear without ever being spoken. You belong here. As they prepared to leave, Richard casually asked, Tell me, does Victoria still make you mop the gym floor after training? Ethan gave a small laugh. Sometimes. Richard shook his head. A world champion shouldn't be cleaning bathrooms. It's just helping around the club. No. Richard looked him directly in the eyes. It's keeping you small. The words stayed with Ethan long after he went home. Meanwhile, Victoria sat alone in her office reviewing financial records. The championship had brought attention, but not stability. The mortgage she had taken out years earlier was still unpaid. Several sponsors had promised support, then quietly disappeared. The gym survived month to month. She stared at a folder labeled Riverside Debt. She closed it before Ethan walked in. He didn't need another burden. Over the following weeks, Richard became impossible to avoid. He appeared at televised events. He praised Ethan in interviews. He sent expensive training equipment, invitations to elite camps, luxury accommodations, connections with wealthy promoters. Everything Victoria could never provide. None of it came with a price. At least, not one Ethan could see. One evening, Ethan finally asked the question Victoria had been dreading. Why do you hate Richard so much? Victoria didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the ring and rested both hands on the ropes. I don't hate him. You act like you do. I know him. So tell me. She looked at Ethan. There are things I can't prove. His expression hardened. So they're just accusations? No. They're warnings. Then show me evidence. Silence. She couldn't. Most of Richard's victims had signed confidentiality agreements. Others had accepted settlements. Some were too ashamed to speak. A few could no longer speak at all. Victoria quietly said, Not every truth comes with paperwork. Ethan sighed. That's not enough. Those 4 words cut deeper than any insult. Because for 5 years, her word had always been enough. Not anymore. The next month, Richard invited Ethan to dinner. The restaurant overlooked the Manhattan skyline. Professional athletes filled the room. Business executives greeted Richard by name. Champagne flowed freely. Toward the end of the evening, Richard leaned forward. You know why Victoria never became famous? Ethan looked up. Richard answered his own question. Fear. She's not afraid. Oh, she is. He smiled. She teaches fighters to survive. I teach them to dominate. Ethan said nothing. Richard continued. Ask yourself one question. If she's really capable of building champions, why is she still running a broken gym? The sentence echoed inside Ethan's mind for days. The next sparring session became a disaster. Victoria noticed Ethan dropping his left hand. Again. He ignored her. Keep your guard up. I know. No, you don't. I said I know. She stopped the session. What's wrong with you? He pulled off his gloves. I'm tired of being treated like I'm still some homeless kid who walked in here 5 years ago. You still have things to learn. I've won a world title. And champions lose them every year. He laughed bitterly. Maybe because they never leave coaches who hold them back. The gym froze. Every fighter stopped moving. Victoria stared at him. What did you say? You heard me. For the first time, she saw Richard speaking through Ethan. Not his words. Richard's. Weeks passed. The arguments became more frequent. The distance between them grew. Then came the press conference that changed everything. A reporter asked an innocent question. Ethan, who deserves the most credit for your success? Everyone expected one answer. Victoria. Instead, Ethan smiled at the cameras. I've learned from many people. My journey isn't about one coach. I've simply outgrown some environments. Victoria was standing less than 20 feet away. Their eyes met. He looked away first. The cameras didn't notice. She did. That night the interview went viral. Sports analysts debated his comments. Fans speculated about a split. Social media exploded. Some accused Victoria of controlling Ethan. Others claimed she was jealous of bigger trainers. Richard remained silent, exactly as he intended. A week later, Richard visited Riverside again. This time he didn't come alone. 3 wealthy promoters followed behind him. They inspected the gym with barely concealed disgust. One whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. This place looks condemned. Another laughed. And this is where the heavyweight champion trained? Several young boxers lowered their heads in embarrassment. Victoria remained calm. Richard walked into the ring. Ethan. The champion climbed through the ropes. Richard placed a contract on the canvas. A new training agreement. Private facility. 8-figure sponsorship. International exposure. He smiled. Everything you've earned. Victoria looked directly at Ethan. She didn't beg. She didn't argue. She simply said, if you sign that contract, make sure you're signing it because you believe in yourself, not because someone convinced you to stop believing in the people who stood beside you. For a brief moment, Ethan hesitated. His hand hovered above the papers. Then Richard quietly added, champions don't owe anyone their future. Ethan picked up the pen and signed, without looking at Victoria. The promoters applauded. Richard shook Ethan's hand. Flash cameras exploded. It looked like the beginning of a glorious new chapter. But Victoria wasn't watching the celebration. She was staring at Richard. Because during the handshake, she caught something almost no one else noticed. Richard wasn't looking at Ethan with pride. He was looking at him the way a gambler looks at a winning ticket. Not with affection. With ownership. For the first time in years. Victoria felt genuinely afraid. Not for herself. For the young man who had just walked willingly into the hands of the one person she had spent years trying to protect him from. And she knew one terrifying truth. Richard never invested in a fighter. Unless he expected to profit from breaking him. The champion publicly humiliated the woman who raised him. And she finally walked away. The first 6 months under Richard Wolfe looked like a dream. Ethan's social media exploded. Luxury brands competed to sponsor him. Magazine covers called him the future of boxing. Television hosts praised Richard as the genius who had unlocked Ethan's true potential. No one mentioned Riverside Boxing Club anymore. No one mentioned Victoria. It was as if the 5 years before the championship had simply disappeared. Richard made sure of that. Whenever journalists asked about Ethan's early career, Richard always answered first. Talent always finds its way. It was only a matter of time before the right people found him. The words sounded harmless. But each interview erased another piece of Victoria's sacrifice. Ethan noticed. He never corrected him. At first, he told himself it wasn't important. Then, he stopped thinking about it altogether. Meanwhile, Riverside struggled to survive. Without its champion, sponsors vanished. Several young fighters left for larger gyms. The roof still leaked. Bills piled up. Victoria quietly sold another piece of her father's estate to keep the doors open. She never complained. The children who trained there after school still needed a safe place to go. That mattered more than pride. One rainy afternoon, a nervous teenager entered the gym. His face was bruised. His hands trembled. "I heard you help kids who can't afford training." Victoria smiled. "Who told you that?" "My older brother. He trained here years ago." She handed the boy a pair of gloves. "No one gets turned away here." The young fighter's eyes filled with tears. It reminded her of Ethan. She quickly pushed the memory aside. Across the country, Richard's methods slowly began to change. He increased Ethan's sparring sessions. Longer, harder, more dangerous. "If you're comfortable, you're getting weaker." Ethan accepted every challenge. He trusted Richard completely. After all, the victories kept coming. Then came the headaches. Small at first. A dull pain behind the eyes after training. Richard dismissed them. Normal. Then dizziness. "You're dehydrated." Then blurred vision. Too much screen time. Ethan believed him. He wanted to believe him. Champions weren't supposed to complain. One evening, Ethan noticed something strange. A young welterweight named Marcus stumbled out of the ring after sparring. His speech was slurred. He collapsed against a wall. "Someone call an ambulance." Several trainers rushed toward him. Richard didn't move. "He'll be fine." Marcus wasn't fine. Doctors later diagnosed a serious brain injury. His career ended that night. Richard publicly blamed the accident on unfortunate circumstances. Privately, he replaced Marcus with another promising prospect before the week was over. No memorial. No visit. No apology. Just business. Ethan felt uneasy, but Richard always had an explanation. There are casualties in every profession. If you can't accept that, boxing isn't for you. Months later, a charity gala brought together the biggest names in American sports. Victoria attended only because Riverside had been nominated for a community award. She wore a simple navy blue dress. Nothing extravagant. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there for the children whose lives the gym had changed. As she stepped inside, the room suddenly grew quiet. People recognized her, not as a celebrity, as the woman who had built a world champion. Before she could take another step, she heard a familiar voice. "Victoria." She turned. Ethan, standing beside Richard, surrounded by cameras. For a brief second, she saw the young man who had once cleaned the gym after practice. The boy who had promised never to forget her. Then the moment disappeared. A television reporter rushed over. "This is incredible. The coach who discovered Ethan and the coach leading him today." She smiled brightly. "Can we get a photo together?" Victoria hesitated. Richard answered before she could. "Of course." The cameras flashed. Then the reporter asked, "Ethan, who was the greatest influence on your championship journey?" The room fell silent. Victoria wasn't expecting praise. She only expected honesty. Ethan adjusted his jacket, smiled politely, and said, "Every chapter has its purpose. But eventually, you outgrow people." Laughter rippled through part of the audience. Someone clapped. Another reporter added, "So Riverside was just a stepping stone?" Ethan shrugged. "You could say that." Victoria felt the words hit harder than any punch. A stepping stone. 5 years. Countless sacrifices. Her father's legacy. Reduced to one sentence. Richard lowered his head, hiding a satisfied smile. Exactly as planned. Victoria looked directly at Ethan. She searched his face for regret, for hesitation, for the smallest sign that he hadn't meant it. There was none. She quietly removed the small Riverside lapel pin from her jacket. The same pin she had worn every day since inheriting the gym. She placed it on the table beside him. Then she said, calmly enough that only Ethan could hear, "I hope one day someone values you more than you valued the people who believed in you." She turned around and walked away. The cameras chased Ethan, not her. No one noticed the tears she refused to let fall until she reached her car. That night, Victoria sat alone in the empty gym. Every corner held a memory. The heavy bag Ethan had split during his first year. the bench where he had fallen asleep after training, the office where they had celebrated his first professional contract with cheap pizza because it was all they could afford. She smiled through the pain. Then she opened an old wooden box. Inside lay a small velvet case. She had almost forgotten it. Years earlier, before he passed away, her father had arranged an introduction between Victoria and the son of one of his closest friends. At the time she had declined. The gym had become her entire life. There had never been room for anything, or anyone else. Months before, that same family had reached out again. Not to pressure her. Simply to ask if she would be willing to meet him. She had politely postponed. Again. Tonight. For the first time. She picked up the phone. His name was Daniel Carter. He came from a respected family that had known hers for decades. Their parents had once hoped the two families might become one. Victoria had always resisted the idea. She believed love couldn't be arranged. It had to happen naturally. Still, she agreed to one dinner. Nothing more. Daniel arrived exactly on time. No bodyguards. No designer suit. No attempt to impress anyone. He stood when she entered the restaurant, pulled out her chair. Listened more than he spoke. He never interrupted. Never looked at his phone. When she mentioned Riverside, he didn't ask how much money it made. He asked, "What's your favorite memory from the gym?" The question caught her off guard. She answered without thinking, "The kids." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." As the evening continued, Victoria realized something she hadn't experienced in years. She wasn't being admired for what she could do for someone. She wasn't being treated as a coach, or a business owner, or the woman who built a champion. She was simply being treated with kindness, with patience, with respect. When the dinner ended, Daniel walked her to her car. He didn't try to kiss her. He didn't make promises. He simply said, "I enjoyed getting to know you. If you'd ever like to have coffee, I'd be honored." For the first time in a very long time, Victoria smiled without forcing it. Across town, Ethan sat alone in Richard's private training facility. The headaches had become worse. He rubbed his temples. As he reached for a bottle of water, he accidentally walked past Richard's office. The door wasn't fully closed. Inside, Richard was speaking on the phone. Ethan wasn't trying to listen. Then he heard his own name. He stopped. Richard laughed quietly. "Don't worry. He'll fight. He always does." A pause. "No. He doesn't know about the scans." Ethan's heart skipped. "Scans?" Richard continued. "By the time he realizes how much damage he's taken, our investors will already have made their money." Silence. Then Richard chuckled. "You can't build fortunes protecting fighters. You build them replacing them." Ethan's blood ran cold. His hand slowly tightened into a fist. He wanted to believe he had misunderstood. He wanted to walk away. But deep inside, for the first time since leaving Riverside, he heard Victoria's voice echo in his mind. "Not every truth comes with paperwork." And suddenly, he wasn't sure who had betrayed whom. The truth came too late. Ethan stood motionless outside Richard Wolfe's office. His heart pounded so loudly that he could barely hear the rest of the conversation. Inside, Richard continued speaking in the calm, businesslike tone that had fooled so many people for decades. "No, the MRI isn't going to stop the title defense." A short pause. The neurologist was paid to keep his mouth shut. Another pause. "If the kid retires now, everyone loses money." Richard laughed. "But if he fights one more time, the pay-per-view numbers will be historic." Silence. "After that, I don't care what happens." The call ended. Ethan backed away before Richard opened the door. His hands were shaking. His breathing became uneven. His mind refused to accept what his ears had just heard. 4 months, every headache, every dizzy spell, every moment when the room briefly spun. Richard had dismissed them all. Normal. Dehydration. Stress. Fatigue. Every explanation had been a lie. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. He replayed hundreds of conversations in his mind. Victoria warning him. Richard smiling. Victoria refusing to insult Richard without proof. Richard demanding blind trust. Victoria telling him that a coach protects a fighter. Richard telling him that pain is weakness. Piece by piece, the puzzle began assembling itself. For the first time, he wondered whether every decision Richard had made had been about money instead of victory. The next morning, Ethan secretly requested copies of his medical records. The receptionist hesitated. "I'm sorry. Coach Wolfe instructed us not to release them. My records belong to me." She looked uncomfortable. "I'll lose my job. I'll take responsibility." An hour later, she handed him a sealed envelope. "I was never here." Inside were reports from 3 different specialists. The first warned of repeated concussive trauma. The second recommended a minimum of 12 months away from competition. The third advised immediate neurological monitoring before any future fight. Every report had one thing in common. Each recommendation had been ignored. Attached to the final page was Richard's handwritten note. "Clear him. Investors cannot afford a postponement." Ethan stared at the words until they blurred. His stomach turned, for the first time in years. He felt afraid. Not of losing. Of never waking up after his next fight. He drove straight to Richard's mansion. No cameras. No reporters. No security announcement. He entered through the unlocked side gate and found Richard beside the swimming pool, calmly drinking coffee. Richard looked up. "You look upset." Ethan threw the medical file onto the table. "What is this?" Richard barely glanced at it. "Your medical history. You hid this from me." "I managed it." "You lied." Richard slowly stood. "I protected your career." "You protected your money." Richard sighed as though explaining something obvious to a child. "You think champions become champions because everyone is honest? This sport survives because people make difficult decisions. You could have died." Richard's face remained emotionless. "But you didn't." The words echoed across the patio. Ethan felt something inside him finally break. 5 years with Victoria. Months with Richard. The difference suddenly became impossible to ignore. One woman had skipped meals so he could eat. One man had hidden brain injuries so investors could profit. Ethan swung without thinking. His fist slammed into Richard's jaw. The older man crashed against a chair. Security rushed forward. Richard raised one hand. "No." He slowly wiped blood from the corner of his mouth, then smiled. "I wondered how long it would take. You used me. I invested in you. You destroyed Marcus." Richard shrugged. "He wasn't profitable anymore. You destroyed other fighters. They accepted the risks. You destroyed lives." Richard stepped closer. "I created legends. You created victims. For the first time in years." Richard's smile disappeared. "So did Victoria finally poison you against me?" Ethan's voice became ice cold. "No. You exposed yourself." Within days, everything collapsed. The receptionist anonymously leaked Ethan's medical records. A former physician confirmed the reports had been altered. Marcus's family spoke publicly for the first time. Then another retired boxer came forward. Then another. Then another. Each story sounded different, but every ending was the same. Permanent injuries. Broken careers. Secret settlements. Threats. Silence bought with money. Sports networks interrupted programming. Investigative journalists uncovered years of hidden payments. Sponsors abandoned Richard overnight. Athletic commissions opened multiple investigations. The man once called boxing's greatest strategist suddenly became its biggest scandal. Television stations replayed old interviews where Richard claimed, "A fighter must trust his coach completely." Now the sentence sounded terrifying. Ethan watched every report alone. Every interview reminded him of Victoria's warnings. She had never exaggerated, never manipulated him. She had simply tried to protect him. And he had rewarded her with humiliation. The realization hurt far more than any punch he had ever taken. 3 days later, he drove back to Riverside Boxing Club. The parking lot looked exactly the same. The faded sign, the cracked sidewalk, the old brick walls. Nothing had changed, except him. He stood outside for several minutes before gathering the courage to enter. The familiar smell of leather and chalk filled the air. Children laughed while skipping rope. Heavy bags swung rhythmically. For a brief moment, felt like coming home. Then he noticed something strange. The office door was open. Inside, someone else sat behind the desk. An elderly trainer looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Victoria." The man hesitated. "You haven't heard?" "Heard what?" "She isn't here anymore." Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. "Where is she?" "She stepped away from the gym." "When?" "A few weeks ago." "Why?" The old trainer studied Ethan's face before answering. "I think you already know." Ethan slowly walked through the building. Every corner held memories. The heavy bag where Victoria had corrected his jab thousands of times. The bench where she wrapped his injured hands. The office where she celebrated every small victory as though it were a world title. He opened the storage room. His first pair of gloves still hung on the wall, carefully repaired, preserved. She had kept them, even after everything. His eyes filled with tears. On the desk lay a small cardboard box with his name written across the top. Inside was every newspaper clipping from his career, every ticket stub, every amateur medal, every photograph from his first tournament. Victoria had saved everything. At the very bottom rested a handwritten envelope. His hands trembled as he opened it. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it probably means you've finally come back. I always hoped you would. Not because I wanted you to apologize, but because I wanted you to be alive. Champions eventually lose titles. Fame disappears. Money comes and goes. But your life can never be replaced. I never fought for your career. I fought for you. If one day you discover that I was right about Richard, promise me only one thing. Don't waste your life drowning in guilt. Become the kind of man who protects others from people like him. That would be the greatest victory either of us could ever achieve. Victoria." By the time he reached the final line, he could no longer hold back the tears. He sank into the old wooden chair and cried harder than he had after any defeat. Not because he had lost a championship, but because he had finally understood the difference between someone who needed his success and someone who had simply loved him enough to let him hate her if it meant keeping him safe. That evening, Ethan asked one of the young trainers a question he was almost afraid to hear. "Do you know where Victoria is?" The trainer nodded slowly. "I do." Ethan stood immediately. "I need to see her." The trainer lowered his eyes. "You can try." He paused before continuing. "But from what I've heard, she isn't waiting for anyone anymore." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" The trainer took a slow breath. "I heard she's engaged." The word struck Ethan harder than any heavyweight punch. His legs felt weak. His mind refused to accept them. Engaged? To who? "A man named Daniel. They've been seeing each other for months. They're getting married soon." Ethan stood frozen in the silent gym. Only then did he realize the cruelest lesson of all. The truth had finally set him free. But it had arrived too late. The woman who had spent 5 years building his future had finally started building a future without him. He came back for her. But she had finally learned to choose herself. Ethan did not sleep that night. He remained inside Riverside Boxing Club long after everyone had gone home, sitting beneath the faded championship photographs that once made him feel proud. Now every picture felt like an accusation. There he was at 19, standing beside Victoria after his first amateur victory. There he was at 21, his hand wrapped in bandages while she held an ice pack against his shoulder. There he was at 24, smiling with his first professional belt. Victoria stood beside him in every photograph. Not in front, not behind, beside him. And in every image, she looked happier about his success than he did. Ethan had spent years believing loyalty meant staying with someone until a better opportunity appeared. Victoria had believed loyalty meant staying when there was nothing to gain. He finally understood the difference. Only now, she belonged to a life where he no longer had a place. At sunrise, Ethan found the old trainer sweeping the gym floor. "Where is she?" The man stopped sweeping. "I already told you." She left. "I need an address." "No." Ethan stood. "I'm not asking for forgiveness." "That's good," the trainer replied, "because you haven't earned it." Ethan absorbed the words without arguing. I need to tell her I know the truth. She knew the truth before you did. I need to apologize. You already apologized to yourself all night. The trainer rested both hands on the broom. Men like you think an apology is powerful because it makes you feel pain. But pain isn't payment. Ethan lowered his eyes. What would be? Change. I can change. Then do it without asking her to watch. The old man returned to sweeping. Ethan remained there for several seconds. Then he noticed a cream-colored invitation lying on the desk. The envelope was open. On the front, written in elegant gold lettering, were two names: Victoria Hayes and Daniel Carter. Beneath them was a date. 3 days away. Ethan picked up the invitation. The ceremony would take place at a small estate outside the city. Private. Family only. His chest tightened. 3 days. He had fought 12 rounds with broken ribs. He had survived knockdowns that would have ended other careers. But the thought of Victoria standing beside another man made him feel helpless in a way he had never known. He had always imagined she would be there. Not romantically. Not honestly. He had simply believed she would remain somewhere in the background of his life, waiting for the day he needed her again. That was the cruel truth. He had not valued her enough to choose her. But he had expected her never to choose anyone else. Ethan drove to the address printed on the invitation. The estate belonged to Daniel's family. A quiet property surrounded by oak trees and stone walls. Workers arranged flowers near a small outdoor pavilion. There were no reporters. No flashing cameras. No sponsors. No luxury branding. Everything felt simple. Real. Ethan parked outside the gate and watched from his car. Then he saw Victoria. She stood near the pavilion wearing jeans and a white shirt, holding a clipboard while speaking with a florist. Her hair was tied loosely behind her head. She laughed at something the woman said. Ethan had not seen her laugh like that in years. Not carefully. Not politely. Freely. Then Daniel approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Victoria. She took it without checking the label. She trusted that he knew exactly how she liked it. Daniel noticed a loose strand of hair across her face and gently moved it aside. The gesture was small, almost invisible, but it broke something inside Ethan. He had given Victoria trophies, publicity, stress, debt, fear. Daniel had given her peace. And peace, Ethan realized, was worth more than everything he had ever won. He should have left. Instead, he stepped out of the car. Victoria saw him first. Her smile disappeared. Daniel followed her gaze. He did not look threatened. He did not move in front of her. He simply stood beside her. Exactly where Ethan had once stood in all those photographs. Ethan approached slowly. I'm sorry for coming uninvited. Victoria held the coffee with both hands. You shouldn't be here. I know. Daniel looked at her. Would you like me to stay? The question struck Ethan immediately. Daniel did not decide for her. He asked. Victoria nodded. Yes. Daniel remained. Ethan swallowed. I found the medical reports. Victoria's expression changed. Are you all right? Even after everything, her first question was about his health. The shame nearly crushed him. The doctor said I need to stop fighting. Maybe permanently. Victoria looked away for a moment. She had spent months fearing those words. Now they had become real. I'm sorry, she said. Ethan shook his head. Don't be. You tried to save me. I tried to warn you. And I destroyed you for it. Victoria's voice remained calm. You didn't destroy me. I humiliated you. Yes. I let Richard erase everything you did. Yes. I made you feel like 5 years of your life meant nothing. Her eyes finally hardened. Yes. Ethan's voice broke. I was wrong. Victoria looked directly at him. I know. He had imagined this moment dozens of times during the drive. He had imagined her crying, shouting, demanding explanations. Instead, she simply stood there, quiet and certain. She no longer needed him to admit the truth. She had survived without it. Ethan removed something from his pocket. The Riverside pin. The one she had left on the table at the gala. I kept it. Victoria stared at it. I thought it meant you might come back. It meant I was too ashamed to throw it away. He held it toward her. It belongs to you. She did not take it. No. Ethan looked confused. It was your father's. And I gave it up for a reason. I can't keep it. Then put it somewhere you'll see it. Why? So you remember what happens when gratitude becomes entitlement. The words landed cleanly. No cruelty. No anger. Just truth. Daniel remained silent until Ethan turned to him. You know who I am? Yes. And you still agreed to let me speak to her? Daniel's expression did not change. It wasn't my decision. Ethan looked at Victoria again. That one answer explained everything. Daniel did not treat her like property. Did not protect her by controlling her. Did not demand gratitude. He respected her choices, even when those choices made him uncomfortable. Ethan had once mistaken possession for loyalty. Standing before Daniel, he finally saw what respect looked like. I need to tell you something else, Ethan said. Victoria waited. Richard targeted me because of you. Her eyes narrowed. He had recordings. He said you were the only person who might interfere. He needed me to stop trusting you. Victoria took a slow breath. And you made it easy. Yes. The honesty hurt, but he did not avoid it. He knew exactly what I wanted. Money. Fame. Bigger rooms. People telling me I was special. No, Victoria said. He knew what you feared. Ethan frowned. She continued. You were afraid of being poor again. Afraid that people would look at you and see the boy who came into Riverside with torn shoes. Ethan looked down. He convinced you that anyone who reminded you of your past was trying to keep you there. Ethan could not answer. Because she was right. Again, Richard had not created Ethan's weakness. He had simply found it. I've turned over every recording, Ethan said. The Athletic Commission has opened a formal case. The doctor who changed the reports is cooperating. Good. Marcus's family is suing. They should. I'm going to testify. Victoria studied him carefully. Even if it costs you your titles? Yes. Your sponsorships? Yes. Your reputation? Yes. She stepped closer. And what happens when the cameras stop watching? Ethan did not answer immediately. Then he said, I'll still testify. For the first time, something softened in her face. Not forgiveness. Recognition. The first sign that the boy she once trained might still exist somewhere inside the man standing before her. I also transferred the championship bonuses into a fund. Ethan continued. Victoria frowned. What fund? For fighters injured under Richard. You don't need to tell me that. I know. Then why are you telling me? Because I wanted you to know I finally listened. Victoria's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. You listened too late for us. Ethan closed his eyes. There it was. The sentence he had feared more than any medical diagnosis. I know. Do you? Yes. He looked at Daniel. Then back at her. I came here thinking I might stop the wedding. Victoria's face became still. Ethan continued before she could speak. I told myself it was because you still cared about me. Because no one could understand 5 years like we did. He gave a bitter laugh. But that wasn't love. No, Victoria said quietly. It was panic. She nodded. I didn't want you back because I had earned you. I wanted you back because someone else had shown you what I never did. Daniel looked away, allowing Ethan the dignity of finishing. Ethan's voice grew quieter. I thought losing you meant I had finally understood your value. He shook his head. But maybe I only understood my loss. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. That was the first truly selfless thing he had said. Ethan looked at the wedding preparations. Does he make you happy? Victoria glanced at Daniel. He makes me feel safe. Ethan flinched. Not because the answer was dramatic. Because it was not. She had not said Daniel made her heart race. She had not spoken about destiny. She had said safe. After years of chaos, that was what she had chosen. A man whose presence did not require recovery. A relationship where love was not proven through suffering. Daniel took her hand. Ethan watched her fingers close around his. No hesitation. No fear. I loved you, Ethan said. Victoria looked at him. Maybe not the way I should have. Maybe not the way you deserved. But I did. I know. The answer surprised him. You know. Yes. Then why? Love is not enough. The words silenced him. Victoria continued. Love without respect becomes hunger. Love without honesty becomes control. Love without gratitude becomes expectation. She looked toward Riverside's pin in his hand. You loved the part of me that would always return. Ethan's eyes burned. And now? Now I love myself enough not to. For a long moment no one spoke. Wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere behind them, workers tested music for the ceremony. A piano melody drifted across the garden. Ethan had imagined fighting for Victoria. Arguing. Begging. Making some grand declaration that forced her to remember everything they had shared. But real love, he finally understood, was not a championship belt. Could not be won through persistence. Could not be taken because he regretted losing it. He looked at Daniel. Take care of her. Daniel's voice remained calm. She takes care of herself. Ethan almost smiled. Of course that was his answer. Ethan turned to leave. Ethan, Victoria called. He stopped. She walked toward him. For one impossible second hope rose inside his chest. Then she wrapped her arms around him. Not like a lover. Not like a woman returning. Like the coach who had once held a terrified 19-year-old after his first defeat. Ethan closed his eyes. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. I wish I could change it. You can't. I wish I had believed you. So do I. He began to cry. Victoria held him for one final moment. Then she stepped away. Don't make this the end of your life. Ethan wiped his face. I don't know who I am without boxing. You were never only a boxer. Then what am I? Victoria looked at him the way she had on the first day he entered Riverside. Not at what he was. At what he could become. That part is finally up to you. Ethan left the estate without looking back. Not because it did not hurt. Because he knew that if he turned around, he might ask her for something she no longer owed him. 3 days later, Victoria married Daniel beneath the oak trees. There were no television cameras. No celebrity guests. No exclusive magazine deal. Riverside's young fighters formed 2 rows along the aisle, each wearing a small gold pin shaped like a boxing glove. The old trainer walked Victoria toward the pavilion. Before taking Daniel's hand, she glanced toward the empty chair reserved for her father. A photograph rested there. Beside it lay the original Riverside pin. Daniel had recovered it from Ethan that morning. There was no note, only the pin. Victoria touched it gently. Then she stepped forward. When Daniel spoke his vows, he did not promise to protect her from every difficult thing. He promised never to make her face those things alone. Victoria cried. Not because the words were beautiful, because she believed them. At the same time, Ethan entered a hearing room crowded with lawyers, commissioners, and reporters. Richard sat across from him. The old trainer wore a dark suit and the same confident expression he had always used. When Ethan approached the witness table, Richard leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. Then he smiled at Ethan. It was meant to intimidate him. It failed. For the first time, Ethan saw Richard clearly. Not as a legend. Not as a monster. As a frightened man who had survived by convincing damaged fighters that he was more powerful than they were. Ethan raised his hand and swore to tell the truth. Then he did. He described the hidden medical reports, the dangerous sparring, the secret payments, the altered scans, the recordings, the threats. He named every fighter he could remember, every doctor, every promoter, every investor. By the time he finished, Richard was no longer smiling. The scandal destroyed careers across the boxing world. Richard lost his license. Several physicians faced criminal charges. Promoters were investigated. Victims who had remained silent for years finally spoke. The final verdict came 11 months later. Richard Wolfe was sentenced to prison for conspiracy, fraud, witness intimidation, and medical falsification. As officers led him from the courtroom, he turned toward Ethan. You think this makes you a hero? Ethan shook his head. No. Richard smiled bitterly. Then what does it make you? Ethan looked toward Marcus, seated beside his sister in a wheelchair. A witness. Richard's expression changed. For men like him, nothing was more dangerous than someone who refused to remain silent. Ethan never fought professionally again. Doctors warned that another serious concussion could cause permanent damage. First, retirement felt like death. The cheering disappeared. The invitations stopped. Sponsors found younger champions. Fans moved on. The world that had once treated Ethan like a king replaced him within months. Victoria had warned him that fame was temporary. This time he listened. He sold the penthouse, sold the cars, auctioned several championship items. Then he returned to Riverside, not as its owner, not as its champion, as a volunteer. The first morning, the old trainer handed him a mop. Ethan stared at it. Seriously? The trainer raised an eyebrow. You too famous to clean bathrooms? Ethan smiled. Not anymore. He spent months repairing the roof, replacing broken equipment, and rebuilding the youth program. He never placed his championship belts on the walls. Instead, he hung photographs of injured fighters who had survived Richard's system. Beneath them he added one sentence. A fighter's life is worth more than any victory. Years passed. Riverside became one of the country's first boxing clubs with independent medical oversight for every athlete. No coach controlled medical records. No promoter selected the doctors. Every fighter received psychological support and long-term health monitoring. Ethan used his name to change the system that had almost killed him. But he never called himself redeemed. Redemption, Victoria had taught him, was not something a person declared. It was something they practiced. Quietly. Repeatedly. Without applause. 5 years after the wedding, Victoria returned to Riverside for the club's anniversary. Daniel walked beside her. A little girl held each of their hands. Ethan saw them from across the gym. For 1 second the old pain returned. Then the girl released Daniel's hand and ran toward a group of children near the ring. Victoria laughed and followed her. She looked older. Happier. Completely at peace. Ethan approached. Welcome home. Victoria smiled. It looks different. Better. Much. Daniel shook Ethan's hand. No tension. No competition. That chapter had ended years ago. Victoria studied the photographs on the wall. Then she saw the sentence beneath them. Her eyes moved toward Ethan. You remembered. I remember everything now. She nodded. That can be a heavy thing. It keeps me honest. A young fighter climbed into the ring nearby. He was 17. Talented. Angry. Afraid of being poor. Ethan recognized the look instantly. The boy shouted at another coach, threw down his gloves and threatened to leave. Ethan started toward him. Then Victoria touched his arm. What are you going to say? Ethan watched the boy. The truth. Will he listen? Probably not. Victoria smiled. Then say it anyway. Ethan climbed into the ring. The boy glared at him. You don't understand what it's like to have nothing. Ethan looked toward Victoria. She stood beside Daniel, holding their daughter's hand. For years, Ethan had believed his greatest tragedy was losing her. It was not. His greatest tragedy had been becoming the kind of man who could lose someone like her. His greatest victory was that he had finally stopped blaming anyone else. He turned back to the young fighter. You're right, Ethan said. I don't know your life. The boy's anger weakened slightly. But I know what happens when someone offers you everything you ever wanted and asks for your soul so slowly that you don't notice it leaving. The gym became quiet. Ethan picked up the boy's gloves. A real coach won't promise to make you fearless. He handed them back. A real coach will care whether you survive your ambition. The boy stared at him. Who taught you that? Ethan looked across the gym. Victoria met his eyes. There was no unfinished love between them now. No secret hope. No debt. Only history. Pain. Gratitude. And the quiet understanding that some people do not remain in our lives forever. They remain in the person we become. Ethan smiled. The woman who saved my life. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Daniel squeezed her hand. The bell rang. The young fighter raised his gloves. And Ethan stepped forward to teach him the lesson he had learned too late. A championship can make the world remember your name. But the way you treat the people who loved you before anyone knew it. determines whether your name deserves to be remembered at all.